Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we will be reading chapter 2 of the book, The Missing Gator of Gumbo Limbo by Jean Craighead George. In this chapter, we're going to learn a lot more about the character traits of the woods people. So listen carefully so you can recall the details of the woods people. When I got back after seeing Travis off, I rolled the fish and cornmeal and I put them in a pan over a low flame on the stove. Then I went back to the hole to look for Dejean. James, his real name is James Double, so everyone calls him James, was hauling in the snapping turtle trap. James, I said, running to him. An official's going to shoot Dejean. What? He said, stopping his work. Shoot Dejean, I repeated. He's gotten too big. I glanced toward the glassy Gumbo Limbo trees to see if Priscilla was listening. She was too far away to hear us, but not too far to be seen. Through the curtains of strangler fig roots, I could just see her head bent over her card table. She was writing poetry in her notebook. She writes about Dejean. Dejean of Gumbo Limbo Hole is the title of her epic poem. Without a word, I gave James the reward notice. He read it, he crumpled it, and he stuffed it in his pocket. We looked at each other and agreed not to mention the reward to anyone, particularly Priscilla. I don't know what she does with all those many gin bottles, James said, but whatever it is, I don't think we should encourage it with $100. I nodded. Priscilla had several bags of these many bottles by her table. Whenever she got her welfare check at the post office, she came home with more. I hope she isn't harming herself, James murmured, more to himself than to me. I didn't answer because I couldn't understand how collecting little bottles could hurt anyone. So I got to the point. What are we going to do about Dejean, I asked. We really need him to protect us from the outside people. We'll have to get him out of Gumbo Limbo Hole for a while, he said. Tell you what, I'll lure him into the solution pit with this turtle, and then we'll feed him so much he won't move out. When the pest control man thinks Dejean's dead or gone, we'll lure him back to the lake. I like the idea of Dejean in our solution pit. Solution pits are peculiar to limestone country, particularly in Florida. There are sinkholes that can be a few feet across or 100. Some are shallow and dried up in the winter dry season. Others are very deep with steep limestone walls. James says they are made by the acid from decaying plants eating into Florida's limestone bedrock. The pit in Gumbo Limbo Hammock is about 20 feet across, a big one, and James doesn't know how deep. It is back among the mahogany trees and surrounded by wax myrtle, water oak, and spackleberry. In the rainy season of summer, it fills to within 1 foot of the rain. During the dry season, it falls 3 or 4 feet. Lacy mosses and fern grow down its walls. One fern, the Venus hair fern, grows nowhere else in the world but on the walls of Florida solution pits. Dejean would like it. I think all beasts know beauty when they see it. Certainly Dejean likes the pretty lily pads and his pure white sandy beach. Since I spend a lot of time around the pit looking for caterpillars and butterflies, I found it exciting to think of having Dejean there to talk to. We woods people get our drinking and bath water from the solution pit. James tests it from time to time. It is as pure as sunshine, he says. The water comes from the Tamiami aquifer, a layer of porous rock below many layers of clay and limestone. The layers are mostly old ocean beds that stretch from where we are in La Playa all the way to Georgia. The aquifer gets its water from the rain. It percolates down from layer to layer, and then, like all water, it moves downhill seeking the sea. It moves very slowly. James says the water in our solution pit could have fallen as rain in Georgia 10,000 years ago. It tastes wonderful and feels silky. Mom and I put buckets of pit water out in the sun to heat up, and then we wash with soap berries and jump in Gumbo Limbo Hole to rinse. Since the solution pit is quite far from Gumbo Limbo Hole, I asked James how he was going to get Dejean to follow him there. He'll follow if he's hungry enough, he answered. Tiger Wind, my Seminole Indian friend, has 12 alligators and a pen in his village. When they're hungry, they'll follow him a quarter of a mile to his chickee, his house of poles with palm leaf roof. When they're not, they won't move. Dejean had better be hungry, I said. Travis is coming back tomorrow. James took the drowned turtle with its pointed nose and bear-trap jaws out of the trap, and he tied a rope around its neck. And then he walked to the shore of Gumbo Limbo Hole looking for Dejean. Two egrets in a cocoa plum preened their snowy white feathers, and an anahinga swarmed with its body under water and its head and long neck above the surface like a snake. Sometimes they are called snake birds. No sign of Dejean, James said, his brown eyes narrowing as he scanned the glassy surface. As a matter of fact, he went on, I haven't seen him for several days. How long has this official been hunting him? He didn't tell me. James threw the turtle far out into the water and jerked the rope to make the creature look alive. No Dejean swirling up to take it as he usually did. James, who likes just about everything that's alive, even bedbugs, doesn't like snapping turtles. They pull like ducklings under the water, then drown and eat them. Dejean does too, but he serves a good purpose, James says. He not only keeps people out of the woods, he weeds the lake so the fish can multiply and feed the birds and mammals and us. Dejean does a professional job when it comes to removing weeds. He crosses Gumbo Limbo Hole like a bulldozer. He shoves water plants before him and then up on shore. The water twinkles clear wherever he has plowed. James threw the turtle out again and slowly dragged it in. James moves slowly, he once told me, so he can savor being alive. When he returned from the Vietnam War, he didn't want to go to work ever again. He wanted to look and smell and listen. So he set out across the United States, sleeping wherever he was when the sun went down. He had studied wildlife, biology, and geology in college, and he knew the whereabouts of the beautiful places on Earth. After the war, he set out to find them, the sequoia forest of California, the alpine tundras of Wyoming, and the tall grass prairies of Kansas. One day he came upon Gumbo Limbo Hammock. It lies on the eastern outskirts of La Playa, a winter resort on the tip of Florida Peninsula on the Gulf of Mexico. He told me how he walked into it one day. He smelled, he saw, listened, and stayed. In Gumbo Limbo Hammock, James fashioned what he called the niche. A niche, he told me, is an ecological term for a place an individual or species occupies in a community of plants and animals. And that individual or species has a role to play in the community, he said. What is yours? I asked. I don't know yet, he answered very softly, and I looked up at the canopy of the hammock. The niche is under, within, and up in a huge banyan tree. The air roots of the tree come down to earth and grow like a forest. You squeeze between them into rooms and dens. Some of these James has roofed with palm thatch so they won't leak when it rains. His bed is 10 or 12 feet up in the tree in a string hammock. The mosquitoes that live in the woods fly no higher than 9 feet, so they never bite James when he's in his bed. His chairs are pillows, all kinds of discarded pillows he's found in the old and wealthy part of town. He calls the niche his university, and it must be. He is always learning something there. After James settled down in Gumbo Limbo Hammock, he wandered out to see the town pier in the Gulf. There he met Caruso. He was homeless, so James invited him to Gumbo Limbo Hammock. Caruso nested under the mahogany tree. His real name is Joe Carlo, and he is a famous opera singer. About a month ago, after Caruso had made his home, he met Priscilla, and she followed him home and put down her bags among the Gumbo Limbos and settled in. A year ago, Mom and I arrived and put up our tent under the oak. James came over to admire it. Caruso walked around it, and Priscilla sat down at the orange crate table and asked if we had any mini gin bottles. Mom looked at her scornfully. Don't be shocked, James had said when he saw Mom's face. That's Priscilla's way of welcoming you to the woods. Thank you very much, Mom said, extending her hand to Priscilla and smiling her wide smile that perks up everyone. And James went on, I welcome you too. I did not know at the time how special those greetings were. I would learn later that woods people don't like outsiders. At that time, I knew only that They were nice people and I liked them. No one asked us why we were there. I guess they didn't have to. Mom told me after they had left that she had gone into the woods before she moved us there to see if it was as isolated as she had remembered. She had run into James baiting his turtle trap. You'll be just fine here, he assured her after they had talked a bit. Old Dejean, the dragon, keeps everyone away, and I'll make sure your daughter does her homework. He did far more than that. He made sure I got up in time to walk the half mile to school, and he arranged leaf quizzes on the orange crate when I came home at 4. There are 2,000 plants in southern Florida, and I think he's made me learn 400. The ones I like best are the ones that fix belly aches and mosquito bites. But back to James and the turtle. He gave up trying to lure Dejean with it, and he dragged it up on shore. He looked very perplexed and discouraged. Why don't you call Dejean? I asked. He always comes when you call. We usually have to see each other to have that work, he said, but I'll give it a try, and he cupped his hands around his mouth. Grrr, he roared in the manner of the bull alligator. And he waited, and there was no response. The egrets went on preening their feathers, and the pintail duck swarmed peacefully in and out of the reeds. Swam peacefully in and out of the reeds. Or to say that there was no bull alligator near them. Where the heck can he be? James asked. Could he be dead? I ventured. No, he replied. The scavengers would be after him. We'd see vultures in the air and turtles in the water. A 12-foot carcass would cause a lot of activity. Maybe he left, I said. Doubt it, James replied. The only thing that could cause him to leave would be lack of food. Gumbo Limbo Hole is a zooarium. He might be hunting a mate, I said. Wrong season. Well, we've got to go find him before Travis does, I said. So what do we do? I'll circle the hole, he answered. Maybe I can find his tracks or some clues to his whereabouts. You stay here and you watch for him. He put the turtle back in the trap so the vultures and raccoons wouldn't get it. He washed his hands in the clear blue water and he dried them on his hair. James is tall and bony with black hair, a long, slim nose, and ruddy cheeks. His blue jeans are frayed, but he always wears nice, clean shirts. Mom and I wonder how he washes them. We never see him carrying laundry over to the laundromat like we do. I think he uses the soapy bark of the slippery elm tree and washes his clothes in the cypress swamp. Mom thinks he wears them to the pier and washes them under the outdoor showers, and then wears them home, drying them as he walks. James threaded among the jungle plants as slowly and gracefully as an egret. His head moved from side to side as he searched the waterscape. While he scouted, I stood on the bank trying to think like a nature detective. Alligators have lungs and must surface for air. I would watch for bubbles. Bubbles are alligators' footprints, so to speak. They rise and they lie on the surface like tracks. I couldn't see any bubbles and sat down to watch the birds gathering for the evening. They would betray the old dragon with their chatter and screams if he were in the bushes along the edge of the water. The birds were calm and their voices throaty and conversational. Presently, Caruso came up the trail dressed for a concert in his black suit and white shirt. He was wearing his top hat with the red feather in it. He told James he found the feather in Gumbo Limbo hammock, but he and I didn't believe it. It's a tail feather, and there are no birds with bright red tails in Florida. The sun struck the feather, and it fairly glowed as the old man approached. Caruso, I said, the officials are going to shoot Dejean. Well, that's horrible, he exclaimed, throwing back his coat and sticking his thumbs in his suspenders. They can't do that. He's our dragon, our guardian, our good friend. He'll be all right, I said, seeing how perturbed he was. James is going to hide him. Hide him? He'll lure him into the solution pit, I said. Caruso thought about that, nodded, and pursed his lips. Clever, that James, he said. Except we can't find Dejean. No one has seen him for a while. Have you? Come to think of it, no, he answered, and he walked to the water to have a look. Suddenly, I remembered the fish that I had left cooking on the stove. Try to find Dejean, I called, and I ran home. Mom had removed the fish and was heating up the soup leftovers the owner of the diner gave her. She brings the leftovers home every day, often with biscuits and butter. I was glad to see the fish weren't burned. Then, weren't I was glad to see the fish weren't burned. Then turned to Mom. An official's going to kill Dejean. Oh no, she said. He can't do that. Dejean protects us from the outside people. And Priscilla writes poems about him, I added. She needs him for inspiration. She writes poetry? Mom took off her jacket she wears for her business school. Is it any good? Well, I've never seen any of her poetry, but she ought to be good at it. She was once an editor for a magazine in New York. She was? What on earth is she doing here? Mom asked. Well, I answered carefully because I had never read her poems, just talked to her about them. Her poetry doesn't sell very well, so she has to live frugally. I sat down on my limestone seat, but that's not the real reason she lives in the woods. She's afraid to be indoors. She can't stand walls around her. I looked at Mom. I need her to be very honest with me. Some of the kids at school who had seen Priscilla in town said she was crazy. Is that crazy, Mom? No, she answered thoughtfully. Some people need to be free and unfettered. She looked up at the magnificent oak as if she was speaking for herself. We sat down at the orange crate and began eating our soup and fish. Liza Kay, she said when we were almost done, Priscilla has been hurt very deeply. She once lived in a beautiful house. She showed me a picture of it. I asked her why she had left such a lovely place, and she said that the walls were closing in on her. Her house was getting smaller and smaller. She became very frightened and took a bus to see a relative in Florida. She never looked her relative up. Instead, she lived on and under the La Playa Pier. The police would urge her to move on, but she would come back to the pier when they left her alone. Then she met Caruso, and he recommended the privacy of Gumbo Limbo hammock. She must be happy here, I said, speaking for myself. I don't know about that, Mom answered slowly, but perhaps she is if she writes poetry. Why does she collect mini gin bottles? I asked. This gingerly because I knew Priscilla's minis were disturbing to Mom. I've never asked her, she answered evasively, but then everyone was evasive about the minis around me. I don't think they wanted me to know what Priscilla did with them. But Liza Kay, she said, getting to her feet, I like her very much. She's very gentle. As I scraped my bowl clean, Mom ladled out a third cup of soup. You'd better take Priscilla her soup before it gets dark, she said, and give her my love. Priscilla lived in the grove of handsome gumbo limbo trees with their red bark and silvery green leaves. Her bed was a wicker love seat someone had thrown away, and her office, as she called it, was a card table under a thatched palmed roof James had built for her. She was writing when I walked up. Good evening, Liza Kay, she said, closing her notebook and glancing at the soup. Oh dear, you've gone to such trouble, and I'm not hungry at all. Well, I'll just put it on the stump, I said. Maybe you'll be hungry later, or you can give it to the raccoons. That's a lovely idea, she said. Every night we went through this routine, and every night she ate the soup as soon as I turned my back and started home. An official's going to kill Dejean, I said. Priscilla's fingers clutched the edges of the table and she rose to her feet. No, please tell him no. The color had drained from her face. People will come in here and when he's dead and take me away. No, they won't, Priscilla, I said with great confidence. James, Caruso and I are going to save him. You must, she whispered. I need to know he's there. We have a plan, I went on. He'll be safe tomorrow. She looked at me without much conviction. Really, I said. She smiled pathetically and picked up her soup, and for the first time she ate it while I was still there. Mom called me, and after reassuring Priscilla again, I ran home through the woods. I guess I needn't have worried that Priscilla would have wanted the $100 reward for Dejean. She loved him as much as I did. I really loved Priscilla too. She was a poet, and poets are very special people. They give words to the thoughts we cannot express ourselves. All right, I hope you enjoyed chapter 2. Thanks for listening.